The Rise of Skywalker left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. It is both an incredibly loved movie, but also an incredibly hated movie. If it wasn't for The Last Jedi, I don't think there'd be any debate that The Rise of Skywalker is the most controversial Star Wars movie. And the thing about this film is that when you view it in a vacuum, then it's not that bad of a movie. However, it doesn't make sense to view it like this. The Rise of Skywalker is the final installment in a massively beloved franchise that has spanned for over 40 years, and it's the sequel to one of the most divisive movies of all time. And the biggest fault this movie has is that it's being held down by its legacy. Now naturally, The Rise of Skywalker has its supporters, and that's absolutely valid. I've made a video on the reasons why I think a lot of people love this movie, but today, I'll be a lot more critical. However, I just want to make it absolutely clear that if you love this movie, then that's absolutely fine. I'm happy for you. Even though I don't enjoy this movie very much, that doesn't mean that I'm mad that other people do. As long as we can all be respectful of each other's preferences, then I don't think it matters what we like and what we don't like. But yes, as I said, I will be a bit more critical of The Rise of Skywalker than I usually am in my videos. And first of all, as a movie, I don't think it's bad necessarily, but obviously there are plenty of things that you can critique about this movie. For example, I think one of its biggest problems is the pacing. The movie goes 100 kilometers all the way through, and while this does make for an exciting cinema experience, it takes away from the characters and the overall story and themes, because it feels like you don't have enough time to really engage with what's happening. I also think the movie relies too heavily on nostalgia by treading a lot of ground that to me is too familiar and boring in ways, at least compared to its prequel, which at the very least did not feel samey. There are also a lot of inconsistencies in the plot. There are a lot of characters who are kind of shoved to the side in place of only a few that are actually explored with any depth. And do we ever actually find out in the theatrical version what Finn wanted to say to Rey? I don't recall him ever getting to say it. However, when we talk about why people hate this movie, we need to go deeper than simply the reason a film critic would dislike it. We need to talk about the emotions it creates and what the movie stands for. Because a movie being bad or having flaws does not elicit such visceral reactions from people as to produce hate. There's a pretty significant difference between disliking a movie and critiquing it and hating it. And while I can definitely critique this movie, I also used to have some real hate for it. And I want to spend some time going over this because I think some people might be able to relate. So, picture this. I loved The Last Jedi when it came out. I know this movie didn't do much for a lot of fans, a lot of people felt like it ruined Star Wars for them, but to me, this was almost my perfect Star Wars movie. I resonated with a lot of the decisions made in that movie that a lot of other fans hated. For example, I love the arc that Luke goes through. He goes from this broken hero to the hopeful savior. I know a lot of people wanted to see a different portrayal of their favorite hero, but to me, this felt human. It was really interesting because while it sucked to see a hero of mine so down in the dumps, having failed over and over again, and letting the shame and guilt keep him down, but then seeing him rise back out of that slump due to his interactions with a young and sporadic Jedi, which eventually leads him to becoming the spark that the Resistance needed, was truly remarkable. By accepting his past and learning from his mistakes, he was able to become the symbol of hope that he had struggled with for so many years. This Luke was perfect to me. I also absolutely loved the fact that Rey was no one. I was invested in the whole debate surrounding who Rey's parents were. I loved trying to speculate about it. It was fun. But when the movie came around and it was revealed that she was no one, it was really impactful to me. I just assumed that she would be a Kenobi or a Skywalker or a Palpatine, you know, one of the known names, but I hadn't realized that the most interesting lineage for her thematically would be to not have anything special at all. First of all, it's what she needed to hear. She had spent her whole life seeking someone who could give her meaning, someone who could tell her what her place in all this was. But the whole time she needed to give herself meaning. No one was going to make her special except for her. And I also loved how the light side of the Force emerged in a complete nobody, while the dark side arose in a Skywalker. The fact that anyone could have been Rey was awesome, and I think that's such a cool message for new Star Wars fans. I also loved making Kylo the main villain after he sheds himself from Snoke's grasp. It's not that I wasn't interested in who Snoke was and I would have still wanted to learn a bit more about him, but the character that I was really interested in from the start was Kylo Ren, and I think he would have made for a fantastic antagonist for the third installment. And despite despite some issues, I still overall really like Poe and Finn's stories in this movie, especially Poe's. I think his back and forths with Holdo are great because they're both too set in their own ways to acknowledge that perhaps if they saw eye to eye and worked together, that they'd be able to accomplish way more than they each could solo. That's the thing, both of them are right and both of them are wrong. They simply aren't looking at the issue from each other's perspectives. And I think people forget the tunnel vision that can arise from really stressful situations, as this situation very much is. So ultimately, I love a lot of things about The Last Jedi. It's still one of my favorite Star Wars movies, and so imagine my disappointment when I went to watch The Rise of Skywalker and saw that they'd walked back a lot of what made The Last Jedi really special to me. For example, Rey Nobody is now Rey Palpatine, which, as I've said before, by itself in a vacuum is a pretty interesting theme to explore. The main character, the good guy, actually being the granddaughter of the most evil person the galaxy has ever seen, who's now back to wreaking havoc on the galaxy once more. This is interesting, and I like how Rey struggles with her heritage in the movie, but I just think it takes something away from her arc in The Last Jedi. I personally think it was a lot more interesting when she was no one rather than a Palpatine, both thematically but also in terms of what the Force actually means. I guess Rey really just was powerful because she comes from a powerful family. How boring and disappointing. At least I think so. Again, if you like The Rise of Skywalker, then awesome. I have no problem with that. However, another thing I'm not particularly fond of is Palpatine's return in of itself, because I think it overshadows Kylo Ren, who granted I still believe has a pretty awesome arc in this movie. I just wish more of the focus would have been on him as an antagonist rather than focusing on the past. Listen, I know that there's a split on whether people like Palpatine's return or not, but I was just personally disappointed by it. To me, it felt like nostalgia bait rather than trying to do something new and interesting. I also ultimately feel that Luke's sacrifice didn't really have the big impact that it could have had. The Last Jedi shows how his sacrifice kept the Resistance alive, and his story spreads itself so far throughout the galaxy that it ignites hope in a lot of people. But then in The Rise of Skywalker, there isn't really much support for the Resistance, and we don't know why. We just know that the First Order is big and scary, but like, did Luke's sacrifice really change anything? Don't get me wrong, I still like his appearance in the movie. I love the similarities between him and Yoda. I just think it would have been cool to me if Luke's sacrifice had a bit more of an impact on the galaxy as a whole. Now, Poe and Finn are also severely underutilized in this movie, especially Finn. Now, Finn was amazing in The Force Awakens. He was the co-lead alongside Rey, but The Last Jedi started his fall into not really being as fleshed out. But there was still potential for his character. I mean, I think Finn learning to fight for selfless reasons, as in being a rebel rather than fighting for selfish reasons such as running away and saving Rey, is a pretty solid arc. Him beating Phasma is a great moment for him, despite Phasma being very underutilized. But in The Rise of Skywalker, however, he just screams Rey's name a lot, and he meets up with fellow First Order deserters, which had a lot of potential to be really meaningful, but ultimately it just falls a bit flat. I was never the biggest fan of Rose in The Last Jedi, but when I watched The Rise of Skywalker and saw that they'd completely written her out of the franchise, I was like, what? I don't even think the people who hated her character in The Last Jedi wanted to see her completely shoved to the side. I mean, of course some people probably did, but I think most people would have liked to see her character be fixed, not to just be thrown in the trash. It was disrespectful, and it meant that Kelly Marie Tran never got her chance to shine after all the fucking abuse she received. But the main reason I hated this movie when it first came out was because it gave in to the hate. It let the toxic sides of the fandom win, and they ended up trying to make a movie that would satisfy the worst parts of the fandom, when those people never would have accepted this movie no matter what it became. We know this because this very vocal and aggressive minority of Star Wars fans have been doing this shit ever since the franchise first started. Most of the issues in the Star Wars franchise, whether it be the reactions to the prequels or the sequels or even Empire Strikes Back, can be traced back to toxic and selfish fans who have soured this franchise for the millions and millions of fans who may not like certain parts of Star Wars, but who still love Star Wars as a whole and want the fandom to be united. These people were listened to, and Disney lost their backbone, and I can appreciate The Rise of Skywalker as a movie, but as the final installment of Star Wars, for me at least, it left so much to be desired. And in many ways, it's my least favorite Star Wars movie, even though I don't think it's the worst. Star Wars movie. So yes, I have a lot of gripes with how The Rise of Skywalker turned out to be. It pissed me off in a lot of ways, and while there definitely are people who like and even love this movie, which by the way is amazing and I'm very happy for them, there are still a lot of other people who also really don't like it. Some people are like me and despise it as a sequel to The Last Jedi, while other people hate it as being part of the sequels in general. To some, this movie represents a lot of what they don't like about Disney Star Wars, and since I think that many people agree that it's the weakest of the Disney movies, then if you already didn't like the direction Disney had been taking, then you'd probably dislike this movie even more. I also know a lot of people hated Palpatine's return for reasons other than I did. Some people think that Palpatine's return completely disregards Vader's character arc in The Return of the Jedi, that his sacrifice ultimately meant nothing, and while I don't fully agree that it weakens Vader's arc, because he did return to the light side, he did get redemption, and he did save the galaxy, at least for a while. However, making Palpatine's return is not only a cheap nostalgia bait tactic to get older fans invested, it also kinda just disregards the climax of the war against the Empire because Palpatine was planning something bigger all along. So while I don't think this argument is the most relevant, at least to me, I definitely understand why people hate it, and I think it's valid, but to me that wasn't the main problem with Palpatine's return. Another reason a lot of people really hate what this movie turned out to be was what it could have been. There were a lot of plans for The Rise of Skywalker. Colin Trevorrow apparently had his script ready that was scrapped in place of J.J. Abrams' script, and a lot of people thought that Colin's script was a lot better. Naturally, we Star Wars fans often have our own ideas and hopes for what a Star Wars movie will turn out to be, and it can be painful if a movie turns out to be way different than that. There are a lot of emotions involved in a franchise as beloved as Star Wars, and naturally some people are going to thrive, and others will get hurt, and it sucks, but that's just how it goes. We can't all get what we want all the time. I just hope all fans get what they want sometimes. And listen, these points are all valid. However, one group of The Rise of Skywalker haters that I will never be able to understand or accept are the idiots who harassed or abused any of the people who worked on the movie, or abused the people who liked or disliked the movie because they are pieces of shit. Some people truly do hate the sequels for anti-woke reasons. They hate that there is a female main character. They hate that a lot of the characters are non-white and non-male. They hate the same-sex kiss. They hate that there are some good women and some evil men because apparently Disney hates men and has a female agenda. And to all the people who hate the sequels for these reasons, fuck you. Opinions like these are not valid reasons for hating a movie. It only shows you for the scumbag you really are. I have no tolerance for beliefs like these, and I truly believe that these toxic-ass fans have made the fandom worse for everyone else, either by harassing the creators or the fans who like the things that these people dislike, or by getting compared to the non-toxic fans who simply don't like certain Star Wars projects for valid reasons. And then those good fans get called out for things that this group of toxic fans did. So listen, toxicity within the fandom has led to this divide, and the reasons that these so-called fans have for hating The Rise of Skywalker are stupid and dumb. However, we're now back to the question, does this movie deserve the hate it gets? And well, I guess it depends on why people dislike it and how they react to this dislike. Genuinely, I don't think hatred is healthy for people. Holding a grudge against a movie that let you down or hurt you will only keep you in those feelings for a long time, which will begin to affect you negatively. I myself let go of the hate that I originally felt for this movie very early on, and while I still look back at the movie with dreams of what it could have been, I simply don't care enough about it anymore to actually hate it. And I can appreciate watching it. And this has not only been better for my mental health, it's also been a lot better for my relationship with Star Wars as a whole. Not everything in this franchise will be what I want it to be, and that's fine. Star Wars is for any of us, but a single piece of Star Wars media can't possibly be for all of us. So what I'm trying to say is that if you're still bearing hatred for this movie, then I encourage you to let it go. The hate isn't worth it. It'll only keep affecting you negatively. You don't need to love the movie. Heck, you don't even need to like it. Just let go of the hate for your own sake, because as we all know, hate leads to the dark side. Thank you all so much for watching.